Hello. So today I thought I'd do what I think is a very important video on something that I think is essential to understand when it comes to investing, and that is what actually is compound interest. So compound interest is basically it's taking into account that you earn interest as you normally would on your savings or your investments in the form of like literal interest in terms of a savings account or something, or in terms of dividends, or in terms of kind of capital growth in stocks and that type of investment. So each year you'll get that growth, but compounding is taking into account that that interest you've received one year will then be added to your total, and you will be earning interest on top of the interest you've earned. So it's compounding, and the power of compounding means it builds up drastically over time, and it has a huge snowballing effect. So to illustrate that purpose more, I'm going to jump straight in to kind of running through some figures with you. Find my mouse. So to start with, I'm just in Photoshop here. I thought it'd be easier than pulling off all the slides. So if we run some figures. So to start with, I'm just using 10,000, so this could be pounds, dollars, rupees, whatever. Just 10,000 units to start with. And let's start with a very low interest figure. So 5% interest at the moment is achievable in some kind of savings account. So you don't need any skill, any stock picking skills whatsoever. You just put it in the cash savings account and let it do its thing. So if we run through just 5 years, just to give you an idea of how compound interest actually works and what it means. So effectively you've got 10,000 in there. Your first year, 5% interest is 500, which gives you a total after the first year of 10,500. The second year, you are starting with 10,500 because you've had your interest from the first year. And now your 5% isn't worth just 500, it's 525. And that's compound interest for you. So that extra 25 is coming from the power of compound interest. So that gives you a new total after year 2 of 11,025. And surprise, surprise, in year 3, your 5% interest is worth more than it was the year before. And you can see how when this keeps going, year 4, year 5, after not too long a period of time, you're earning far more interest on your starting capital than you were. So the power of compounding has turned your 500 per year interest into 608. And this is, bear in mind, this is working with just 5%, something you could just have in a savings account, and it's assuming that you're not adding any more to your savings each year. It's just leaving that initial 10,000 as it is. And that's just an arbitrary figure. It works exactly the same if you had 1,000 in there, 100 in there, 100,000, a million. Percentages work the same for whatever volume that is in there. So that was just for a 5-year period, a comparatively short period of time. So still working with only 5%, what you can just get in a savings account at the moment. Let's have a look what happens over a longer period of time. So year 1, we've already done that. So let's jump ahead 10 years. So after 10 years of interest at just 5%, you would achieve a total of 16,470, and your interest per year now would be £800 compared to your starting interest of only £500. So you can see the power of compounding is starting. After 20 years, we're up to 27,000, so not too bad on a 10,000 starting pot. And you're now earning 1,320 per year in terms of interest. 30 years, and I'm going to go quite far here just to give you an idea. And by the end of it, after 50 years, which is a long period of time, you're earning £6,000 a year just in interest because of the power of compounding. Compounding has turned that £500 interest a year to almost £6,000 a year. But yeah, the example here is just putting that 10,000 in initially and doing nothing else. You can imagine if you were making regular deposits, how that would build up over time, and if you've turned 10,000 into 120,000, how that could compound even more if you were making regular contributions, and monthly contributions or annual contributions over that 50-year period. And 50 years is quite extreme, I understand that, but I want to cover all age ranges. So if you started investing at 20, by the time you're 70, you can build up a huge pot of money. So I do understand. Looking at this, I feel the same as some of you might, that that's quite slow with 5% after 50 years. Turning 10,000 into 120,000 isn't the biggest gain. So let's have a look at what happens with some more kind of realistic percentages that aren't just put into a savings account, actually looking at active investment options, which is what I think most people watching this video are going to be looking at. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you're probably looking at putting it into more kind of investments that work for you a bit more than just a normal savings account does. So let's turn that off and let's go to some higher percentages. So that was based on 5%. So I'm going to assume a starting pot of 10,000 for all of these, like we did in the last example. So let's start with moving that 5% up to 10%. And 10% is what the S&P 500, the US stock market, has achieved on average over the past decades. So it's achieved an average return of 10%. And I think this is a great figure for most people, because what you could do is just invest into an S&P 500 tracker and just be completely hands-off. It's very low fees for an S&P 500 tracker, and over the long, I mean, obviously history doesn't always repeat itself, but you're quite likely to achieve around a 10% interest figure over the very long run. You'll have dips where there's recessions and things, but it will come back, and on the bull runs it should level out. So looking ahead in these kind of time frames, I would expect, and I think most people would expect, to achieve around 10% investing in a kind of an index tracker like the S&P 500. So that 10% after 10,000 after investing at 10%, after 10 years would be 27,000, 20 years 73,000, and 30 years 198,000. So notice here I'm only going up to 30 years. I think 30 years is a good example to use, because I think most people come to investing like I did in their 30s. I've come in my 30s, where you've worked for a while, you're starting to build up a bit of money, and you're looking to invest. And if you're investing in your 30s, 30 years takes you to your 60s, which is when most people, obviously everyone's different, but most people are looking at kind of retirement. So I think 30 years is a good figure to look at. Obviously, if you can start investing sooner than that, then brilliant, and that means you can either retire early, or by the time you get to retirement age, you've had 40 years, and those compounding results are going to be far more. So that's 10%. Let's look at 15%. So the reason I put 15% in is this is probably going to be obviously it can be achieved in a number of ways, but the way I'm looking at it is 15% is kind of what I'm targeting for my my own investments. So stock picking. So you're beating the market by a decent amount of 5% per year, and if you can maintain 15% over the long run, that's kind of a solid, decent investment result. Most people can't do that. Most fund managers can't even do that. But 15% is kind of the target that I think a lot of people have, me included, of for the extra time and effort you're putting into stock pick, you want to be earning more than just you would be in just a kind of an index tracker. So you add that extra 5% on, and you can see there's a huge difference, and this is the power of compounding with higher percentages. So 10 years, 44,000, 20 years, so you've reached the 30-year goal after 20 years with 15%, and after 30 years, you're at a staggering 875,000. And bear in mind, this is all starting from just £10,000 or dollars, whatever your currency is, without adding anything else during that period. So there's no more deposits. All you've put in with this example is 10,000, and after 30 years, at a compounding rate of 15%, you're at 875,000, almost a million. So you imagine if each year you're adding as much as you can, but 5, 10,000, 1,000, whatever you can do, that's going to grow and grow and grow. So you'll notice here that the power is time. So it's important to get started as soon as you can. And now, slightly more extreme example. So there are people, we're looking at 20% here. There are quite a few people that can achieve long-term returns of 20%. But they tend to, they're always very rich people, and it's very, very difficult to do. From what I've read, or the source I've read, all the people I follow, they tend to be the bigger names. If you're achieving returns of 20% a year, you tend to get noticed. Obviously there are going to be some people that are quite quiet about it, But you can see if you're managing to achieve a long-term return of 20% a year on average, the compounding effects are huge. By the end of 30 years, you've got almost £4 million, again, from a starting pot of £10,000. So imagine adding to that, it racks up quite quickly. And this is just for a bit of fun, really. There's not really many people that can achieve compound growth at 25% a year, but just for fun, let's see what would happen. And from your £10,000 starting pot, you could achieve 16.7 million after 30 years if, on average, every year you were getting a 25% growth rate. So you can see how over long time frames and comparatively small percentages, as I say, 10% just as an index tracker, you can start to generate huge returns over time. So we'll go back to this slide. So you can see, this is back to the 5% example, but you can see how over time, even just at 5%, your initial interest per year was £500, and by the end, it's getting up into the thousands. So you need time to be able to compound these things. And higher percentages means that each year, further down the line, you're earning more in interest than your initial contribution was. And that builds and builds and builds over time. You can see from this graph, it's like a ski slope, but in reverse. And that will just keep compounding up. And this is a 30-year time period, which I think is realistic for a lot of people. And it's never too late to start. If you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you may as well start now. I'm doing investments for my grandma at the moment, who's in her 90s. So whatever time you start, you're going to be compounding and it's going to be working for you. Right, so I hope that helped. It's a very quick video, just running quickly through the power of compounding interest and why it is so important to investing and important to understand the principles of it, that you need time in the market to really appreciate the power of compound interest. At the start, you're not really going to notice it. You've got to be in there for long periods of time, and you'll look back after 10, 20 years and think, oh my goodness, how am I achieving so much interest per year from such a small starting pot? And it's the power of time and compounding interest. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. I'm going to be putting lots more videos out like this. Basically, my channel is, I'm a relatively new investor. I've been investing kind of actively for about 3 or 4 years now. And this channel is kind of documenting my journey as an investor, and also as I educate myself and learn principles that are helping me, I plan to put that out in content such as this to kind of pass on that knowledge and help other people. And thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.